Oh yeah, sexy biscuits. Nice.
Long was 1975. YouTubers on the rise, reviewing games late at night and sometimes friends. But Long was 1975.
Hey YouTube, Lumboys Post 1975. I wouldn't say welcome to another nostalgic memories of video, because this isn't really one of those as such. I mean, there are memories in it, and I have nostalgia for some of those memories, but this is kind of a question to see who else did this, because I can't be the only person who did this. All my mates, I've been talking, the reason I wanted to talk about this, I wanted to do this video last week, but my Mega Drive Mini 2 arrived last week, so you know, that was off the cards. But I've been talking to, because I was off last week, so I was talking to a bunch of my friends, and none of them, and I mean people of my vintage and people in my neck of the woods, Bristol, and none of them remember being able to do this, and they would have been all over this because they, unlike I, weren't fortunate enough to be able to afford one of these consoles at the time. But since no one else can remember it, and they've accused me of basically imagining it or dreaming it, I want to ask, because it's got to the point which is, have I created false memories in my head, you know, because I clearly obviously walk around with my vintage nostalgia goggles on all the time, and you know, has that somehow warped my memory into an event that didn't happen? I'm pretty sure. Well, I'm not pretty sure, I'm not mental, so yeah, this definitely happened. But did anyone out there do this? Because like I said, and this is not like a couple of people, this is like 5 of my mates that I've known since the you know, well, before the mid-90s, but obviously this happened in the mid-90s. And that would be, does anyone else remember renting either a PlayStation 1 or, as I did, a SEGA Saturn from Blockbuster videos in the 90s? Couple of things I just want to get out of the way before I talk about the experience. Obviously, it was a long time ago, you know, pushing 30 years ago and stuff like that. So prices, I'm not going to be completely bang on with the prices and stuff like that, but I am pretty sure I know what the deposit was, and it definitely would have been that, because otherwise people would have walked off with the hardware, because you're buying a heavily discounted system, aren't you? In a fucking dandy carry case as well, but I'm jumping ahead of myself. Obviously, video game rentals were a massive thing in other parts of the world, but I'm particularly thinking of and looking at North America when I say that, because I remember when we were kids and we went to Boston in 1991. I have a memory of that, a vlog about my nostalgic memories of my first time in America as a kid in my nostalgic memories of playlist, and I talk about this there, so I'm just going to be very quick about it here. But I do remember being utterly blown away that in 1991 you could rent video games. From a video store. You know, that was just mind blown. Couldn't do this here back then, absolutely could not. But then obviously you've got to remember that in 1991 the 8-bit micros and obviously the ST and Amiga were still going really strong, seriously, even in 91. And obviously we had Master System and things like that. Mega Drive was on the cards at this point. I just don't know if the culture was there in the UK for a rental video gaming culture. I don't know how to explain it. I just don't know if people thought that that was viable in video stores, that they could rent video games. And obviously I don't mean the micro. So that was mind-blowing when I first saw that in America. My first memory of being able to rent games was probably as late as 1993 in Blockbuster, and that was renting an odd, you know, Mega Drive game here and there for someone else's Mega Drive system, and because obviously we're quite late in '93. And obviously I do remember later on renting PlayStation 1 games, which kind of ties into this video. But yeah, renting games was just not a big thing in the UK. It kicked in a lot later, and there was a lot less of it, because obviously in North America it kicked in with the 8-bits. Didn't kick in, there was no 8-bit renting, there was certainly no NES, and guaranteed no Master System renting. That just, like I said, I would have thought stores just would have thought that was not viable. What's the point? This is crazy, this is insane, why would we do that? We'll lose loads of money, and stuff like that. But So while it kind of kicked in a bit slower, it was basically Blockbuster who pioneered it. Obviously, Blockbuster kicked into this country in the 90s. But something else I wanted to talk about was before Blockbuster, and this was the store that I used to frequent the most because it was just down the road from my mate's house. Who I ended up, actually renting a room off years and years and years later in the very late 90s. He was the guy who built me my PC, my nostalgic memories of my first PC video. But yeah, this was the store that was closest to him. But before it was a Blockbuster, it was a Ritzy Video. Who remembers Ritzy's Video? I'm pretty sure they were a chain. I don't know how massive they were. Don't know if they were huge, but they certainly weren't a West Country alone chain. I'm pretty sure. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. By all means, correct me if I'm wrong, because obviously we're talking about memories and experiences here from the early 90s. But yeah, so we were a member of that video store. They didn't rent games, anything like that. But then literally Blockbuster bought them, and then Blockbuster popped up in the high street overnight. Obviously they'd been knocking around in North America for donkey's years. Not over here, absolutely not over here. So obviously, because it was Blockbuster now, they upped their game, absolutely upped their game. They were like a more polished, outfits and stuff like that. So they were obviously going to rent games. When did Blockbuster kick in North America? I'm assuming it's a North American company. But yeah, it was like overnight became Blockbuster. Overnight, became like a bigger, better rental experience. So that was when you could start renting games. You could start renting Mega Drive games, Super Nintendo games, and then obviously there were PlayStation and SEGA Saturn games that you could rent, because obviously when the new consoles came out in, 95 here, I have nostalgic memories of my original Japanese PlayStation video as well. This has rapidly turned into a video, it's just promoting all those videos. But I had a Japanese PlayStation. I got it in 1994. I was a god when I got that. It cost me £450, so that was £150 over the odds of a PAL console, but mine was NTSC, so it was better. And you didn't need to chip original PlayStation consoles, because you could disc swap. Obviously I did chip it eventually because of the wear and tear on it and stuff like that. But and I obviously was in full-time employment at this point, but safe to say, most people, if they were lucky enough to have that console, even though they got the Crackle Power one that was cheaper than mine, you probably didn't have the disposable income to be able to own two next generation consoles. So you picked a side of the fence. You picked PlayStation or you picked Saturn. And obviously PlayStation, just because of their marketing, stuff like that, Wipeout, things like that, it was the cool kid, it was the adult console. Wipe the floor with the Saturn over here. But obviously they both got equal, featuring, that's a really bad descriptive term there, exposure is the word I'm looking for, in British video game magazines. And obviously this is pre-internet, just about pre-internet, being everywhere and stuff like that. It's like not what it is now. So you lived through magazines, that was where all your information and stuff came from. So I was more than happy with my Japanese PlayStation. So in 95 I had a decent software collection, because obviously it was chipped, so I could buy PAL games, and obviously I had a massive chunk of Japanese games. I was living like a king. But here's the thing, I'm not gonna lie, I had a massive curiosity about the Saturn. I remember when I went and bought my my Japanese PlayStation in St George or somewhere over there. We had to use an A to Z to get there. This is pre-sat-nav. And the guy in the house had one Japanese PlayStation left, reserved for me, because I called up and stuff like that. Got it with CyberSled. But he also had a SEGA Saturn, and he even said to me, when he had one of those for sale, you don't want that, you want this. But he let me have a look at it. And then because of the magazines and because of my experiences in the arcades and stuff like that, wanted to play Daytona. Absolutely wanted to, because this was at like the Saturn's launch, period. So I wanted to play Daytona really, really badly, because I loved it in the arcades, and it got decent views. We all know its faults and stuff like that, but it's a decent game. I'll get a little bit to that later on. But yeah, and I wanted to play Virtua Fighter because I remember experiencing both those games in the arcades. And so even though there was no way I was coming off the PlayStation path, I was on that journey. Still wanted to experience the SEGA Saturn, and obviously you got to remember, because of my Master System and Mega Drive days, arcade experiences and stuff like that, massive SEGA fanboy. Still, even though I was living in Sony Town, so really wanted to experience the Sega Saturn. And my brother, who eventually owned one and then sold it, deeply regretted it, sold it and then bought a PlayStation and chipped it. But that was a few years later, and he had far more disposable income than me and my twin brother, so he had a very nice, decent selection of Saturn games. But that, that was down the road. So, you know, you can't drop basically 600 quid and own both consoles, especially when you're dropping 35 quid to 40 quid on a game. So you could rent them in Blockbuster. I can definitely remember walking in and they had this big sign on the wall which is ask us about renting a PlayStation or a SEGA Saturn, and then it had all the terms and conditions and stuff like that. And this was like, I didn't pony up the money, my mate Andy did, because he earned a lot more money than I did, shall we say. I chucked in a bit, I think I chucked in about 50, 60 quid, and he ponied up the rest of the money. But this was like, wow, dude, and he's like, you got a PlayStation, why do you want to play the Saturn? I go, just want to play Daytona, just want to play Daytona, and I want to play Virtua Fighter. And so we talked to the person behind the counter, and it was like, this is so you can rent a Sega Saturn? And yeah. But here's the thing: how long have you been a member with us in this store? Like, and you had to show up with loads of ID again, even though you had to have ID to become a member of this store. Then you had to drop. I'm pretty sure, but again, you know, when I talk about these sums of money, this is like, you know, 30 something years ago. I'm pretty sure the deposit for the console was the price of the console, because otherwise, as I said at the start of this video, if it wasn't, yeah. If it wasn't, then basically you could get yourselves, you know, a pretty decent discount on an next-gen console, whether it was PlayStation or Sega Saturn. I'm assuming that the PlayStation rentals probably wiped the floor with the Sega Saturn, because I remember them saying, but why do you want to rent a Sega Saturn and not a PlayStation? I said, because I got a PlayStation. I want to see how the other half lives. So yeah, so what was a Saturn? Because obviously in North America, you know, the famous, you know, when it was launched at the shows and stuff like that, after Sega, you know, Sony went on and just went $299, because the Saturn was $399, wasn't it? Was the Saturn £100? It couldn't have been £100 more than PlayStation, because the PlayStation was £299. You didn't get a game. You got what was it, a demo disc. And did you only get one pad? I don't know, I had a Japanese one. I got Cyber Sled with mine because the kiddie gave it to me, and I got 2 control pads. And they were those 1/3 smaller ones with leads that were literally that long. But yeah, anyone who had a Saturn at launch, they couldn't have been £399, surely. 400 quid for a console then? I mean, we're looking at stuff now, but you know, what's 400 quid adjusted for inflation now? But yeah, so whatever it was, Andy ponied up most of the money, right? He gave all this ID. He did it in his name. He did it. It was his rental card. You know, I had one, but he did it on his, obviously. So ID stuff like that, bills and shit to prove where he lived, and then the entire cost of the console, and then to rent the console, because you could rent it, but you could only rent it. I'm pretty sure it was only 2 nights, and so we rented it on a Friday and a Saturday night. But I think the price of renting it back then was, I want to say 25 quid, when you're thinking, well, they're not going to make much money. But, well, if you think about it, you know, it's only going to take a couple of weeks for it to pay for itself. I'm thinking it might be more like 30 quid, but only going to take a couple of weeks to pay for itself. But you're not going to rent the console and not then rent any games. And so I can't remember what the launch games were. They were Daytona, Virtua Fighter, pretty sure Clockwork Knight was a launch game. Can't remember what else was, but we were only interested in the ones that I wanted to play, or also I talked him into playing, which is Virtua Fighter. I mean, he'd been to the arcade, so he knew about, you know, like 3D shit, stuff like that, and Sega pioneered these things basically in the arcades. You know, everyone else was playing catch up. Yeah, so also clearly more people were renting the PlayStation, because I think you had to rent a minimum of 2 games as well. You had to rent 2 games. And yeah, so it was like 30 quid for 2 nights, and you could only rent it for 2 nights. You couldn't rent it for a night or anything like that. This is what I remember from my store. If this was in any other Blockbuster, it might have been different. I don't know. That's why I'm asking you. Or maybe it was you know, down to the individual. Were you a franchise or something? Franchise, I can't think. Sorry, tired. Come back from work. Individual franchise owners, was it? So it was up to you within reason what you did with your store. I'm guessing this would have been across the country or stuff like that. But yeah, so 2 nights, 30 quid, and then you had to rent 2 games for 2 nights, and I'm pretty sure the games were, so you'd be like a couple of quid, £2.50, maybe 3 quid. It's years ago for you know, Mega Drive and SNES games. I want to say it was probably pushing a £5. So you think about it, 30 quid, 40 quid. in one pop, and you drop down. Again, if I'm wrong on these figures, like by all means correct me. This is we're digging away in my head here now for something that I can remember doing, but no one else can. And obviously, because I had a PlayStation, I never really commit shit like this to memory because I never really intended to buy it or go further with the Saturn anyway. This was just like that experience of seeing how the other half lived with these two games that I've always really wanted to play. Anyway, so like, you know, 40 quid I guess we're looking at for 2 nights. So I guess that's easy money for Blockbuster, when probably the most they're going to get is maybe 2, you know, DVD or 2, no, not DVD, VHS back then, I should say, sorry. 2 VHS tapes, maybe stuff like that, maybe 5-6 quid. So I guess that's decent money. And then obviously you rent it out, you got 7 days in a week, so you rent it out 3 times, don't you? So it's got to make a decent amount of money, and obviously you're completely covered because someone's had to drop the entire cost of the console. Because I cannot see that it would be less than that. Again, I'm a bit fuzzy, but I cannot see that it would be less than that. But the entire cost of the console as a deposit in order to be able to do this. So they weren't really losing out in any way or form whatsoever. The only thing I can say is those poor consoles. If this was their life, right? When you own something. Yeah, I mean, I was raised to respect any piece of property whatsoever, whether it's yours or someone else's, because at the end of the day, someone has bought that with their hard-earned money, whether it's a business or an individual. You should still show it some. It's how you should show it respect anyway. It's what a fucking responsible person does. But those poor consoles must have suffered absolutely horribly abusive lives, you know, like. And at what point, the deposit would be so you didn't, you know, walk off with it. But then at what point, because I can't remember any paperwork or stuff like that. Obviously they recorded your information about where you live. Obviously they would have it as well, and they'd take your money and shit like that. But there must have been some sort of clause, which is if you returned it and it didn't work, you lost, you know, your deposit. But also, at the same time, the sheer abuse those things are going to suffer. You could be the unfortunate person who just got it at the tail end of its life, then you return it and it won't read discs. Or would it be like, we'll just fucking repair it or service it? Who even repaired those consoles back then in year 1 of their launch? This is why this is an interesting topic. So many fucking questions and variables here. Anyway, so we had it for 2 nights, and we had Daytona, which I always wanted to play, and we had Virtua Fighter. Obviously, I had Toshinden on my, I have no idea what happened to my voice then, on my PlayStation. Can't remember when Tekken came out, so I don't know if I had Tekken at that point. But Virtua Fighter, I mean, there was nostalgia for it, and we played the tits out of it, but neither of us could get on with the moveset. We just absolutely could not, probably because we never actually played it massively in the arcades and stuff like that. But it was cool. It was cool that we were playing like the Saturn, and we were playing a Sega experience. But I remember being so incredibly disappointed when I finally played Daytona, because I love the arcade machine. I knew it was never going to look like that. I knew that. I wasn't prepared for how it ran whatsoever. I'm a fan of it now, so we'll get to that in a bit. But yeah, so I was a massive fan of the arcade. All the magazines praised it. They only just touched upon its frame rate and its draw distance and clipping and pop up and shit like that. They never, you know, they weren't as, you know, objective as people would be now when they play it and talk about it. But I was just devastated because obviously I had Ridge Racer, which was just fucking amazing on the PlayStation. And let's be honest, it's a different type of game, you know. To Daytona, not massively, but they are, you know, there is a style of racing in both those games that's its own thing, is what I'm trying to say. But I had Ridge Racer, I did eventually. I had Ridge Racer, and yeah, I just remember being so utterly fucking disappointed with Daytona. Yeah, could see that it was the arcade, but compared to how silky smooth Ridge Racer ran, its frame rate, I mean, what was it, 25? Even that, 25 frames a second. I mean, I know there's a, you know, tits ton of cars in it and stuff, but its frame rate when you came off Ridge Racer was just, it's like you were in bullet time. Just, yeah, I was so disappointed. And how short the draw distance was, you know, was just, I just felt like this, I know it's early days, but this console, man, I think I literally made a decision. I mean, we played it and we had fun. And I was disappointed. I don't want to say that we did not play it and we did not have fun. because we did, and I was disappointed. And hell, I didn't pony out most of the money, so what was I going to lose anyway? But it was, and obviously then my brother got a Saturn, so I grew to absolutely fucking love it. And I always thought he should keep it and keep buying games because I had a PlayStation. So then at that point in the house, the family house, we had both systems. But you know, and I love the Saturn now, and I have two. But it was just an underwhelming experience. I think it's because I drawed over everything in the magazines and things like that. Maybe if I went to it without having owned a PlayStation, having a ton of games. Because obviously also when you've only got two games, you're kind of limited in, you know, dipping your toe in the pool and experiencing full experience and stuff like that, even at launch. You know, maybe just one more game and shit like that. But I was incredibly underwhelmed, and I'm pretty sure Andy was too. Yeah, incredibly underwhelmed for those 2 days. A little bit disappointed, and then just never, until my brother got Saturn, ever. I still read the reviews in magazines for games that I wanted, I couldn't get. Genuine original SEGA IPs and stuff like that. But yeah, just stuck with PlayStation. Bought some UK games, bought some Japanese games, chipped it, bought some backups, allegedly, and yeah, never ever, you know, wavered from the PlayStation. But it's a very interesting experience because I can't remember you ever being able to rent a Mega Drive or a SNES. Certainly, and obviously, and as I mentioned at the start of this video, this 8-bit Master System NES, that was just, you know, obviously that was pre-Blockbuster, because this whole rental thing kicked in with Blockbuster as well. So remember that in this country, whole rental thing, video game rental thing, kicked in with Blockbuster. Unless your little, you know, mom and pop store did that, you know, before Blockbuster did in the UK. I don't know. But yeah, so video game rental was clearly a Blockbuster thing. But can't remember renting any other consoles. And the fact that you could rent these new, you know, state-of-the-art machines, especially the PlayStation, when everyone was losing their shit over it, from your local video store, to me, was mind-blowing back then. But now, it's even more so. I mean, obviously, they've gone the way of the dinosaur now, rental stores, so if they were still going strong and streaming hadn't killed them and stuff like that, would you be able to rent a fucking PlayStation 5? I fucking doubt it, to be perfectly honest, even though you could argue price-wise, they're the same thing. They're probably more expensive back then because they're adjusted with inflation now. But yeah, underwhelming. But what a weird thing, being able to walk into your Blockbuster and rent a video games console. Unless in other parts of the world, you know, it's like, what the fuck, dude? This has been kicking around since the 80s. So also the fact that none of my mates, and we're talking people who lived, you know, around the area of Bristol and particularly Ashton, which was North Street, where this Blockbuster previously, a Ritz's video was, none of them can remember this, and they remember, none of them can remember it, and certainly none of them can remember, and a few other people I've talked to online certainly can't remember being able to rent them from any other Blockbuster in the UK, but they could remember being able to rent the games. So, kind of got away from me this a bit, but I wanted to know, does anyone else remember renting either a PlayStation or a SEGA Saturn from Blockbuster back in the day? Or did I literally fabricate false memories in my head and I'm going insane? Anyway, as always, I'd love to know what you think. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you later.